Welcome back to Sustainability Matters. I'm Tria Case. Today, we address a critical issue, the spread of misinformation on climate and environmental topics. Inaccurate reporting and false narratives not only distort public perception, but also hinder effective policy action. Before we talk with our guests, let's first turn to Andrew Falzone for a broader perspective on the topic.
We live in a time where access to information has never been easier. Over the last century, news has shifted from headlines by the day to headlines by the hour to headlines every minute. But with information so accessible, why does it seem like we live in an age of misinformation, particularly around issues of sustainability and climate change?
So what took us so long to take the climate crisis seriously?
It's a question that's being asked more and more by mainstream media, especially when during the earliest days of climate research, things seemed off to a good start.
Those who think we're powerless to do anything about this greenhouse effect are forgetting about the White House effect.
The evidence is there. The damage is being done. We can't just do nothing.
This is more than 30 years ago. Apparently, the world was ready to act on global warming.
One major proponent of misinformation on climate issues is the oil industry. In a 2021 expose entitled Inside Exxon's Playbook, Greenpeace UK tricked former Exxon lobbyist Keith McCoy into revealing previously unknown information about his former company's tactics. The former big oil employee thought he was on a job interview and revealed things previously unproven about big oil's climate playbook.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes. Did we hide our science? Absolutely not. Did we join some of these shadow groups to work against some of the early efforts? Yes, that's true. But there's nothing illegal about that. We were looking out for our investments. We were looking out for our shareholders, and that's at every phase. That's in the Senate. That's in the House. That's with the administration.
That same investigation revealed another former Exxon lobbyist gloating about the company's successes under the Trump administration.
What were the big wins you got out of Trump?
You should Google ExxonMobil announcement and Donald Trump. So he live Facebooked from the West Wing, our big Growing the Gulf project. He mentioned us in 2 states of the union. Yeah. We were able to get investor-state dispute settlement protections in NAFTA. We were able to rationalize the permitting environment and, get tons of permits out. The wins are such that it would be difficult to categorize them all. Tax has to be the biggest one, right? The reduction of the corporate rate and was it's probably worth billions to Exxon. There were a lot of wins.
Another strategy that helps spread misinformation is to simply drown out accurate information. Gavin A. Schmidt is the director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies.
Instead of trying to get people to believe something different, one of the tactics now is just to flood the social media, flood the airwaves with multiply confusing elements, just so that people don't know who to believe.
Misinformation about renewable energy, including solar, wind, and electric vehicles, has been on the rise. An April 2024 report from Columbia University details and debunks 33 false claims about renewables.
The purpose of the report is not to say that wind and solar, won't have any adverse impacts at all. It's instead to look at, what are the claims out there that are false.
One baseless claim is that electromagnetic fields created by solar farms are harmful to humans. According to the report, this claim has no basis in fact. Another false claim is that EVs are more harmful than beneficial to the environment because of pollution from production and disposal. But according to the report's authors, based on multiple EV life cycle analyses of greenhouse gas output, a 300-mile range EV like the Lucid Air, Hyundai Ioniq 6, or even the Chevy Silverado EV produced 60% less greenhouse gases from deployment to disposal. The report's authors also say that once the grid is carbon-free, EVs will be 97% more efficient than combustion engine vehicles. The onslaught of misinformation about climate and other topics has given rise to a greater awareness of and need for fact-checking. A term that was likely only known to folks working in journalism or publishing is now on the tip of the tongue of every average American, all in their search for legitimate, truthful information about climate change. I'm Andrew Falzone for Sustainability Matters.
With us to shed light on this issue are Ilana Berger, a senior representative from Media Matters for America, who specializes in analyzing media narratives and their impact on public discourse, and Nicholas Kuznets, an award-winning reporter from Inside Climate News, who investigates environmental issues and corporate accountability. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Happy to be here.
How do you see those examples impacting public perception and then therefore our ability to make the changes that we need to make?
I would again probably go back to this really crazy disinformation and misinformation being spread about offshore wind. So specifically on the East Coast and in the Northeast, there has been a lot of new projects, a lot of new offshore wind projects, and not just actually offshore wind, all renewable energy projects, but basically there are some groups that are spreading just false claims about offshore winds, that they harm whales when there's no scientific evidence that they are harming whales, that they are killing whales. The number one cause of whale deaths is fishing boats, fishing collisions. And with wind energy in general, another big talking point was that, they kill a lot of birds. They kill too many birds. This is not a technology we should be pursuing. When in reality, climate change, and the Audubon Society has said this, climate change is one of the number one threats to birds. You know, it's disingenuous. If we really do care about wildlife, if we care about birds, if we care about whales, we need to be fighting climate change. We need to be pursuing renewable energy.
How do we combat the misinformation? How do people figure out that this is not true? My experience is that once something gets out there, it sort of takes a life of its own. So how do you combat that? What are some of the ways that you in your field are helping people to better understand what's real?
I guess on a basic level, that's sort of like what journalists do, right? Or at least a big part of what we do. And now there's a lot of talk about like climate solutions and different climate solutions, and oil and gas companies have their favored solutions that they're promoting. And for example, a couple of years ago, I wrote a big series about carbon capture. Carbon capture is this technology, or really a set of technologies, to remove carbon dioxide from smokestack pollution. It's really been used only in kind of niche applications where it's cost effective basically and easy to do. And despite it being around for decades, there's a minuscule amount of CO2 that's being captured. But oil and gas companies in particular, and coal companies have been focusing on this for a long time as a solution, as saying, look, we could continue to burn gas in power plants and just capture the CO2 before it goes up the smokestack. But this is a good example, I think, of sort of how misinformation is shifted in a sense, because there's truth to it. And I think if you talk to a lot of technical experts, there is a role for carbon capture, particularly in certain industries where there aren't good alternative technologies, like cement production is one, for example. But no one thinks it's going to be like a broad, wide solution that's going to mean that you can just continue to, build natural gas power plants and certainly not drive cars burning oil. I mean, I think that the same is true for biofuels, which is another technology that oil and gas companies are looking into, which again, like, has a role most likely in, you know, in the future energy system, but it's a somewhat limited role, and it's in some sense sort of a distraction from the more immediate
investments
solutions
that we need to make. Yeah, it distracts from the investment conversation about the other technologies.
Exactly. So, I mean, in one sense, the oil and gas industry has been extremely successful with this messaging on carbon capture because the federal government has invested billions of dollars, and Democrats, when they gained control of Congress and the White House and enacted the first climate legislation, it included a really substantial subsidy for the technology. The debate's continuing to go. Like, the industry right now is continuing to lobby to increase that tax credit even more. There's the carbon, once you capture it, there's a question of what you do with it, right? And it can be injected underground for storage. It can also be injected into depleted oil fields where it can help, like, push out oil that lost all pressure, right? And so you can use carbon dioxide to squeeze more oil out of the ground. And the current tax credit is, like, structured in a way where it gives companies a little less money if that's what they do with it. But right now, you know, some companies are lobbying to have that credit adjusted so they get just as much money that way. So this debate's continuing to play out.
Very interesting. Are there particular areas where you have found, either of you, your reporting to sort of make that difference, where you feel that your voice was heard and has helped to either, you know, move the ball or stop the ball, if you will, from going in the wrong direction?
Well, I know that at Media Matters, we do these annual reports for cable and broadcast news, where we sort of evaluate how has the news been talking about climate change and environmental justice over the year. So we do one annually, and we really have found that news stations are listening to us. They are interested. They want to improve how they're reporting on these issues. So I think we really have made a difference there.
I've been at Inside Climate News for about 8 years, and there's been a big shift over that period. I mean, at the beginning of that, certainly you had politicians in the US just parroting straight out climate denial. And that's really rare currently. I mean, I still think it's like a strangely partisan issue where the Republican Party has a climate change platform now, but it also involves continuing to produce as much oil and gas as the nation can, which, you know, is somewhat incongruent, to say the least.
We see this concept of fact-checking becoming more a part of lots of conversations. How has that impacted, our climate change conversations? Do you think that's been part of the difference here?
Yeah, so I will definitely say fact-checking has a role to play, and I think has been super important. It creates a more educated consumers of media. However, I will say that the biggest change needs to happen with legislation and needs to happen with the policies of, for example, social media companies. And that's why some of the focus of my work at Media Matters has been sort of, calling out that a lot of climate misinformation is very prevalent on social media. For example, YouTube said a few years ago that it would demonetize climate misinformation, so it wouldn't allow the creators to make money off of videos featuring climate misinformation. And Media Matters, as well as other organizations, have continually found that we can still find that content on there that is being monetized. So what we really need is we need social media companies to commit to having more direct policies and even just having a really good specific definition of what climate change denial is that covers the nuances of it as well.
Do you have a sense of what you think the key indicators of that should be?
What needs to be incorporated here is spreading misinformation about solutions that are in line with what bodies of experts say is necessary to reduce the impacts of climate change. And when I say bodies of experts, I mean the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN body of scientists all across the world that basically come together and sort of determine like what is the science here, what are the impacts of climate change, what actually needs to be done to avoid the worst consequences of climate change.
What can we be doing to make sure that we are finding the facts, that we're looking in the right place for facts?
Right. So I think that the number one thing that I would say, that I would advise to media consumers is follow the money. I would say think critically about the source that you are getting your information from. Could this source be connected to, for example, industry interests? And a lot of times it's not direct. For example, it could be coming from a think tank or a news article that has the same talking points as a think tank that gets money from the fossil fuel industry. So there could be a lot of different steps there, and which is why media literacy is so hard. But I will also say there are some really great fact-checking websites out there, and that's when it really comes in handy. Media Matters does a lot of fact-checking, PolitiFact, factcheck.com. Those are usually really reliable sources of information if you see something and it seems off.
How about for you, Nick? Where do you go to make sure that you're reading what you think you're reading?
People can read Inside Climate News. But there's one thing, we had a project, I think we called it Climate 101 or Climate Questions, where we did both asking readers for suggestions of sort of basic questions about climate change and solutions, and then came up with these, as concise as we could, simple answers. And it was both on sort of basic science, but also on some solutions and some more controversial potential solutions. And I know the New York Times did something pretty similar. So I think these types of, it's a little different than a fact check, but having these kind of repositories of kind of question and answers, almost like FAQs.
We had a show around electric vehicles, and one of the main issues is this concern about being able to have the ability to drive where you want to go, right? Can the battery last long enough? And our colleague from the New York Power Authority assured us, there are plenty of places to charge. We have a website, you can look, you can map out your trip. But I think that concern remains. How do we change people's thinking about something when it settles in, when it becomes a concern that's impacting behavior?
Right. So I would say one of the biggest things is flooding the space with correct information. I know that studies have shown that the more a person sees something, regardless of how many times it's been debunked, if you keep seeing the same piece of information over and over again, you are more likely to think it's correct, which is part of why we're seeing, zombie mis and disinformation take on a life of their own. So it's really important to do something called pre-bunking, where you anticipate a piece of information, a piece of misinformation, and you are constantly putting out correct information. You're putting out the messages that you really want your audience to receive. Another great way to talk about mis and disinformation is called a truth sandwich, which is a technique where you state what is true, then you go back and you, without giving too much attention or credence or legitimacy to the piece of misinformation, repeat it and talk about why it's wrong. And then you return to your main point, which is this is the correct information.
Okay, an information sandwich.
Journalists have a different role in terms of we're not trying to get a message out, but on just a basic level, sort of part of what we're trying to do. I mean, our mission and role is to inform the public and to question things that appear to be misinformation.
It's hard to be that trusted third party, given that there are folks writing about climate from different perspectives, as you both noted. So it's a question of how do you make it clear to folks that you're stating the facts, that you really are a journalist to whom people can look to for the facts. What's the special sauce for being able to do that?
Right. I don't know if we have the special sauce. Do we have it? But I think one important thing is transparency in where your information, where journalist information is coming from and who we're talking to. Making sure that what you're writing has reporting in it. It's not just like opinion journalism or columns.
Yeah, I think actually that was a really great point that you made about this false equivalency problem. This is really something that is still a big problem. We'll see quotes about renewable energy, for example, from someone who is an anti-renewable energy activist, and that is just not mentioned. Not disclosing the ties of your sources to the fossil fuel industry, that's a really big problem. And I think going into that as well, the way to persuade your audience that you are trustworthy, we are simply just the messengers of what the scientific consensus is.
With the various lawsuits that we're seeing around the country, particularly in California, do you think we're entering sort of a new phase of accountability?
I think that's hard to say. I certainly think we're entering a phase of striving towards accountability. I think there is that motivation. And I think that can really be illustrated by the 3-year investigation of the House and the Senate committees. They investigated the fossil fuel industry for basically lying to the public because they were aware that their product was dangerous. They were aware that it would drive climate change. And then, this 3-year investigation culminated a couple months ago. And I just think the fact that that happened, the fact that Congress is paying attention to this issue, is a really big step, and it means something.
Yeah, I would say the lawsuits certainly could be a really big deal, depending on how they turn out. And, broadly speaking, oil companies want them to stay in federal court, and they're being brought in state courts. And so far, mostly that the plaintiffs, the states and counties that are bringing them have succeeded in keeping them in state court. But as governments begin to enact more policies to limit emissions, requiring disclosures. For example, like the Securities and Exchange Commission has been debating, a rule requiring companies to disclose more climate information, right? And so as more of this is legislated and put into rules, then you could hold companies accountable, right? Because that's a lot harder to do when there's nothing illegal about what you're doing, polluting. Sending carbon dioxide into the air is perfectly legal, right? So I do think as more regulations and rules are in place, that gives the opportunity for, accountability in kind of more concrete ways.
So maybe it's sort of a top-down, bottom-up approach here where we have more rules from those who can create them, but also more fact-checking and reporting so that people understand actually what's happening in the marketplace.
Yeah. I'm just going to add what I think is a really important point about what could be driving more climate lawsuits, and that's unfortunately that we are seeing climate change impacts. States are realizing that these impacts are really expensive. You've got billion-dollar disasters. We just had Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. So unfortunately, as we go on and we are seeing more impacts, which is going to happen.
This idea of being able to get the information out sort of ahead of others is one of the pieces that I think we probably do need to be thinking about.
I was just going to say that I think it's like your point with the electric vehicles and people's concern about range anxiety, right? Like whether they'll be able to drive far enough is important because it's an understandable concern. I mean, it makes sense, and like these are new technologies, and people don't know about them, are worried, how they'll change, and so it's just like ripe for misinformation, really, and ripe for being manipulated.
Right.
Change is hard, right?
And I'll just actually add one more thing to that. You were speaking earlier about the Inflation Reduction Act, and this is a landmark climate legislation, and this is also benefiting red states specifically. But the thing is that people still don't know a whole lot about it. And one Media Matters study found that in the 2 years since this legislation was passed, so since August 2022 to August 2024, I think Fox News mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act like twice as much as CNN did. So when people are hearing about the Inflation Reduction Act, they've been hearing negative things and usually incorrect things about it. So it's really important to make these points first, lay out how important it is, how beneficial it is first.
Absolutely. I want to thank both of you for being here with us today in studio and for what you're doing to make sure that we and the public have the information that we need in order to combat climate change. So thank you both very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Please keep the conversation going and follow us or send us a message on social media. Better yet, download our CUNY TV app. Be sure to join us next month to discuss one of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time, waste management. From reducing consumption to embracing circular economies, let's take a look at what's being done to tackle this issue.